what a fun topic to be discussing today, right? Like this is the world I live in every single day. With the Dominion Energy Innovation Center, which is a nonprofit organization, public-private partnership founded in 2009 by Dominion Energy, Activation Capital, and then a couple of municipalities in Central Virginia. And our mission is to really figure out how to support the high-tech entrepreneurs, but also the small business owners that are leading our energy transition across the state, and looking at where do ideas come from? How do they get the support that they need as they get off of the ground? And then who are the partners and where are the regions across the state where they can really thrive as energy entrepreneurs? Because we know Virginia is a diverse state from mountains to the coast, and it takes every energy type to get us there. And so I'm really excited this morning to have a really distinguished panel of industry experts on all sides of it: academia, entrepreneurship, finance, commercialization, to dive into what does clean energy look like and what's the future of it in the New River Valley, the Roanoke Valley, across the state, and where can we fit in as innovators ourselves and as community supporters and certainly as citizens. So really appreciate everyone being here. I'll ask a couple of questions at the beginning, and if you have questions you would like to ask, we'll maybe save 15 minutes or so at the end there to open it up, because I know that's sometimes the best conversations to have, and that's what we really want this to be, as a conversation. We have such diverse backgrounds and businesses represented here, so they're going to do themselves better justice than I can do them in terms of introductions, and so I'm going to first, we'll start here and come back to me. Actually, that works out really well, Steve, thank you. So Brett Malone, President and CEO of the Corporate Research Center.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be here, and welcome to Game Changer Week. We're really excited to have this kind of turnout and to be able to do this diverse set of events. So, and welcome to the Corporate Research Center here in Blacksburg. So I'm the president of the CRC. Our goal really is to help transition technologies, from the university out into the marketplace, and to help, make a lot of these transitions, whether it's biotech or clean energy or autonomous technologies. Our role is to be a hub for where these kind of transition projects can happen. And we develop test beds, we develop labs, infrastructure to help industry understand what's possible. So it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Ben Taylor. I'm head of business development for Independence Hydrogen. We are a early stage, veteran-owned and operated hydrogen production company. So we do local production, local distribution in a farm-to-table business model, so smaller volume production and local customers. And we do that by keeping the hydrogen in gaseous form, so that's the only way that the business model really works. And it keeps the cost and the carbon intensity down for our customers. So I joined the company about a year and a half ago after 23 years in the Army. Like I said, we're veteran-owned and operated. About 70% of us are military veterans, and happy to be here.
Steve Critchfield, and thanks again for all of y'all being part of the Game Changer 3 or 4 days. It's exciting that we keep doing things like this in the Blacksburg, Roanoke area, so that the rest of the Commonwealth pays attention that we do have people in Southwest. Sorry, I had to do my
Very
pitch.
Talented people.
But what I'm doing is helping start up a couple of companies, all kind of focusing on the climate smart. They're really under the auspices of agriculture. My degree is from tech and ag econ. But what you're seeing nowadays, there used to be segmented areas where agriculture was separate and energy was separate and transportation was separate. But now under the climate smart umbrella, you're literally seeing a convergence of all these things working together. And so excited to be here and be part of the panel.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, that worked out well.
Yeah.
So really excited to have both Independence Hydrogen and MOVA Technologies MOVA was in our first cohort of DEIC Accelerate, and Independence Hydrogen is in our current one, which is our way of helping startups that are ready for utility scale pilots get connected with Dominion Energy to scope it, build the business case, pitch it up to executives. But it really shows it takes kind of a whole village to do these types of projects. So, first question to the panel is, we have public institutions that do a lot of research. We have private companies that are doing a lot of research. As we look to commercialize a lot of these technologies, How does entrepreneurship and where is the role of entrepreneurship and innovation in that? Should it be corporations, the dominions of the world, or is there a spot for maybe the small companies? Brett, maybe we'll start with you and we can bounce around.
Well, I think it goes hand in hand with what we need, because a lot of these technologies are still early stage. Not all of them are going to win, and I think the ones that are the companies and the entrepreneurship programs are driving adoption of innovative technologies, and they're engaging with the marketplace in ways that maybe larger companies can't, or larger energy utilities, because of the regulations, they might not be able to. So I think entrepreneurship is important because you get a broader voice of the customer or the market base. You get the ability to adopt technologies that can optimize, and then you can also drive new business models, for example, too. So whether these are small distributed methods or whether they're broad centralized methods, thinking about new business models is part of energy transition. So I think that's where a lot of this comes into play.
That's really interesting. Ben, you are talking farm to table, but for hydrogen and energy. What is that? To Brett's point, it takes almost a different mindset here.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Brandon. It takes a village, right? There is a role for everybody along the value chain here, from organizations like CRC, who can pilot that R&D and have it sounds kind of interesting to say, but approach corporations or approach other companies in a non-threatening way, right? There's a lot of business intel out there, and people get very closely guarded with their business models and confidential information. I think academia can sometimes approach those businesses and open those doors and kind of create the networks that provide the open space for startups and early stage companies like ours to be able to tap into those networks, and through programs like DEIC and others, because it does take a village, right? It's our model is one solution for hydrogen. It's not the solution. It needs to be coupled with corporate scale hydrogen production from Dominion and electric power, EV and everything else out there. We're definitely at a stage in the climate, and the energy transition where we are very much a believer in the all-included solution. We need all of these options to come online and become commercially viable to help with where we're at now.
The all of the above approach, right?
Exactly.
To quote our governor. Steve, what's your take on where entrepreneurship fits into this system?
Well, I guess first disclosure, if I'm an entrepreneur, it's because I was forced to be an entrepreneur. I wanted a job.
Yeah.
But the thing I like about, and I'll focus mostly on the Blacksburg area region in tech, but what I like about being a part of the university community is the fact that you do find younger age 20-year-olds that I don't want to say it. They haven't been jaded.
Yeah.
They still want to go to, there's a bar in town called The Cellar, and they have a beer, and they tell you how they're going to save the world. And you think back, gee, I was there once. The world still hasn't been saved, but we thought we could. But
we're not gone.
Right. Yeah. But so what is neat about it is, and why organizations such as yourselves and the RBTC and what Brett's doing is, you get these ideas and these energy, and you basically try to learn to basically accept that you may, as an older mentor, be wrong sometimes. Most of the times it's more along as channeling the energy into the right areas. But it's exciting for me right now with this particular topic we're talking about, is because I think we've passed the area where we know we need to do something. We need to change. We need to be inclusive about having different types of stuff for the energy. And literally, we're moving into a whole new era where climate smart and worried about the climate is going to be bigger than it ever has been before. And I guess the key thing is that's why an area such as being around a university and corralling and moving the energy into these areas, to me, it's an exciting point, because you'll be told things and you'll think, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
So
that's incredible.
Can I pick up on a point that Steve made too? I think there's not to bring rain onto the roses and rainbows here, but it is about, at the entrepreneur, at the commercial level, it's about being commercially viable, right? And I think that's where you match the idealism, right? And there is a bridge there to get to commercially viable. In the hydrogen space, it's electrolyzers, right? We are working with electrolyzers right now, and it's really hard to make electrolytic produced hydrogen commercially viable because the market just doesn't bear it. So there is still, it's not a stepwise function through the value chain. It is an interplay back and forth of, okay, we're a startup company, we're taking this electrolyzer, we want to make it commercially viable, we're shopping it around, but we still need that help from academia and policymakers and others to continue to close that gap.
Yeah.
So I think there is a gap between some of the idealism and the commercial viability that often has to be breached.
You said it. He said it better than I could. But the key thing is, and a good example, and some of y'all, when we came up with MOVA, one of the first things we basically said is, all right, we've got these great ideas, but who's going to buy it? Where's the market? And I think I see Lisa sitting there. Part of the things that MOVA did was basically go through to figure out the market through the RAMP program. But the key thing that what I'm realizing is that you can come up with these great ideas, but if you can figure out how it can come to market with the business plan without having to continually live off grants and investor money, you're just going to be there a lot faster.
So where does a organization or a structure like the Hydrogen Tech Center in Hampton Roads fit into this, and how does the learning there ultimately get transitioned down here for that type? Because that's trying to bridge a lot of those gaps, right?
Yeah, so the CRC is Commonwealth-wide. We have facilities across the state. We're doing a lot of our energy innovation work in Newport News at our Tech Center Research Park, and we're adjacent to Jefferson National Lab. So we are literally within a couple hundred yards of one of the premier Department of Energy research facilities. So like we in Blacksburg, our facility here is close to the university. Our facility there is close to the Department of Energy. So what we're doing in our role and our mission is to help catalyze a bit of this economy in Virginia and help industry understand what are the options to decarbonize. So Steve said it right. We've long since passed the point of understanding we need to decarbonize. Industry understands that. And especially in Hampton Roads, where you've got so much international and global influence. Europe is ahead of us in adopting these clean energy technologies. But, in Hampton Roads, what we're seeing is, places like the port are bringing big global carriers in, and they're mandating a green pipeline. So they're mandating a carbon neutral pipeline. So even industries that have customers that are pushing them to decarbonize. So back to your question, our role is to help industry understand what is the adoption pathway to these new technologies. And how do we pilot some of these ideas? What does a hydrogen-powered tugboat look like? And how will it operate? And how do we build one, demonstrate it, and then how do we build many? And the same thing in transportation with trucking. So we're helping industry understand what do those pilots look like, so that the commercial scale-up pipeline is viable.
Yeah, fascinating. Ben, maybe you could speak to some of those use cases, some of those decarbonization, like actual implementation projects that Independence is working on, or you've seen in the market that are really kind of capturing what could be in Virginia, the essence of that.
Sure. To actually segue from your initial question into that one, Independence Hydrogen actually started as a backup power company. The intent was to use hydrogen for backup power supply, and our founder, CEO, did years of market research, as in true startup fashion, as the sole employee of the company, and found that the problem he had in trying to get hydrogen for backup power was the supply of hydrogen, right? So it's anyone who's spent a minute in the hydrogen world or market has heard the chicken and the egg problem, right? It's the classic case of how do you get people to convert with a supply, but how do you want to bring on the supply at pace to get people to convert, because, and that leads into use cases, the biggest transportation use case today is for forklifts, material handling equipment, and distribution centers, and our flagship customers are Fortune 10 companies who use hydrogen-powered forklifts in their distribution center. If that distribution center goes down because they run out of hydrogen, which we actually experienced last week. Not thankfully for one of our customers, but another customer who called us in a panic. That's millions of dollars of lost productivity in the supply chain for a 24-hour or 48-hour outage for a distribution center. So that creates tension and hesitancy in the market for companies to convert to the use of hydrogen. Hence, our business model, was farm to table, to be able to do it, produce closely to the customer so that we can ensure that security of supply. If you look at the DOE pathways to commercial liftoff for hydrogen, they acknowledge forklift is like kind of the knife's edge of transportation. I think the game changer, and we were talking before the panel, is going to be Class 8 trucking. When heavy-duty trucking converts from diesel to hydrogen fuel cells, which they're doing right now with companies like Nikola, Hyzon, Cummins, all have variations of either fuel cell hydrogen trucks or internal combustion engine hydrogen trucks. That's going to be a game changer, right? I was driving down here on 81 yesterday and just watching competing with the trucks that are coming up and down 81 and thinking, man, when all of these convert to hydrogen, it's going to be a game changer for our climate, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be a game changer for our company, quite frankly, because that demand will be exponential from what it is today.
It's like every diesel engine I pass,
Yep.
whether it's a truck or the generators, right, or both mounted and mobile ones, it's like dirty, smelly, loud, right? But hydrogen's not the only one. I mean, we would love to know where MOVA's fitting in, a lot of carbon capture opportunities, ammonia opportunities. Like, what are the other energy systems that you guys are looking at?
Well, the biggest one is, again, I said agriculture focused. We got into a area where we realized that if you could capture ammonia in chicken production, the birds were healthier, and it added to the farmer's bottom line. Again, I think we're lucky in the sense that we can make an immediate bottom line. But now you have all this ammonia, and as the ammonia resources grow, I mean, there's a lot of, you can't imagine how many chickens there are on the Delmarva Peninsula, and then you have whatever. But as that ammonia gets captured, what do you do with it? And some of it could obviously, the best purpose could be perhaps fertilizer, but we also began to realize that there's a real possibility of using it for energy. So how about the whole conceptual idea of you capture the ammonia on the farm, the birds are better, now you have the ammonia. The ammonia could be, you figure out how to burn the ammonia to make electricity, because I will submit that ammonia from chickens is green because it's not a fossil fuel derived. Maybe have to mix a little bit of hydrogen in to get the combustion right, 2 to 4%. But the fact of the matter is now you've moved the ammonia right into the energy sector, and I don't know, let's just say 40 or 50% of the energy need of that farm is taken care of by a product that's already there. With ammonia, you end up with the byproduct of burning is basically NOx and water. But now the question is, can the university like this, or think about how you break the NOx apart into its components? If you get the nitrogen, now you have fertilizer. So you could literally, it could never leave the farm. You have a complete 360. So now that ammonia, if it can become part of an energy, could it go to work with you all to do tugboats? Yep. Because you have all of these tugboats that want to switch over to ammonia. And well, guess where all of the ammonia is being produced? On the eastern shore, on the bay. Here are the tugboats, a fueling station. And let's have it here in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, that's the interesting conversation with hydrogen, right? Is there's kind of two factions, right, so to speak, where it's like it's the future fuel source, and then others makes no economical sense, right? It's hard to store, it's expensive to compress, it's really light, it doesn't want to exist with its own self, right? It doesn't like itself. How are those conversations going with industry as the hydrogen tech center comes online, and you talk with tugboat companies or you talk with transportation companies? What's kind of forefront in their minds of the hurdles that need to be overcome in this world?
I think just adopting it in smart ways, like you talked about forklifts. So, at big industrial operations like the Port of Virginia, they're not going to use hydrogen for every vehicle. They have taken massive steps to electrify and, create electric cranes that are pulling power just off the grid. They're using batteries. They're smaller vehicles. So they're doing assessments that says, hey, there's a class of vehicle that makes sense for this based on the duty cycle, based on the fact that we can't get batteries quite there to solve the problem. And so it becomes sort of a force multiplier. And I think it has to be a very sophisticated sort of surgical approach for a lot of these applications for the economics to work. And so that's where the work is. It's in the details of understanding where does it make sense in this constellation of all these options.
Yep.
And, again, I think, Ben, you used a good term. We see ourselves as somewhat of a non-biased, ability to we have a non-biased approach to come in and say, well, here's all of these technologies. You could electrify. You could go with this strategy. You could go with synthetic fuels. And so we come at these problems looking at, okay, well, what makes sense for each technology stack?
That's a really interesting point, and Ben, I want your thought here from the Independence Hydrogen side, where specifically on electrolyzers, right? There's this conundrum of pulling electricity to produce hydrogen when we're already kind of grid constrained in many areas, and how because all of our energy systems are really interconnected, right?
Yeah.
Like we can't really pull them apart, right? You get them down to their fuel sources, but at the end of the day, as the majority of us charge our phones, charge our cars, run our daily lives, we're using massive amounts of energy. And if we're dumping into producing a fuel here, is that not powering a hospital there, right? And it's one of those really big questions, and I think it's still to be determined in the IRA, right? So like, how does Independence Hydrogen approach that on the electrolysis side of like grid pulled versus on-site, renewable generation, and kind of the mix that might happen there?
Yeah, the short answer is we, like everybody else, are waiting to see how the IRA is adjudicated, right?
Yep.
Because that goes back to the commercial viability aspect of it, and even goes back to Brett's point about this concept. In my opinion, there's a false dichotomy in the marketplace right now between like electric vehicle versus hydrogen. I think it is both. It is, but to Brett's point, it requires education and a nuanced conversation about where does it make sense for hydrogen, where does it make sense for electric vehicle. In a very non-nuanced kind of broad way, there's a break point about class 5, class 6 vehicles by which hydrogen makes sense because batteries are just too heavy for the power and the torque required for heavy duty vehicles. I don't know what that break point is. I don't think anybody does, but the hydrogen market is starting to come to grips with that. When you attend presentations by Mercedes and others, they are going down this road, and so the battery electric heavy duty trucking is being not shelved, but certainly downplayed as hydrogen is increasing. But to your broader question, I think it's there is a need for education of of not only the people in this economy and in this marketplace, but the broader public, because there are use cases across the spectrum of hydrogen and electric and everything else. So our first production method for hydrogen is not electrolytic.
Yeah, I was hoping we would get there. It's
Yeah.
so fascinating. It's incredible.
It is a method by which we capture hydrogen currently being invented as a waste stream and purify it to fuel cell grade and compress it and deliver it to our customers. The reason we haven't jumped into electrolytic production is exactly what you're saying. Exactly what you're asking, Braden, which is, if you plug it into the grid, it is not clean, right? It is as clean, I should say, it is as clean as whatever that grid power is,
Yep.
right? Which in most states is not very. There is also an argument if you plug into the grid and you're using, even through a virtual power purchase agreement, you're using renewable resources, is that a good use of the production of hydrogen, right? Because there is an efficiency loss in converting electricity to hydrogen. So why not use that solar power in a hospital versus trying to convert it to hydrogen, which will then be subsequently down the chain used as a fuel source. all good questions. I don't have any good answers right now. From a policy standpoint, good questions that the DOE and the IRS is still trying to figure out, because it goes back to the adjudication of the production tax credit for hydrogen, which plays into the commercial viability.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up policy. Steve, I want to go to you first, and we're going to pop over to Brett on this one. Is you go around, and as an entrepreneur, and certainly at the vanguard of some of these, you have a lot of discussions with a lot of different stakeholders about what MOVA is doing and about kind of your view of, as you were just sharing with us, right? Ammonia capture, refinement, and distribution from the Eastern Shore is through tugboats, and even down here where we have a large agricultural sector that could be used in many regards. But what's kind of to those different diverse conversations? These are really complicated subjects. How do you approach them with stakeholders? What's how do you talk all the different possibilities and talk the language of everyone while you're doing this?
Well, I mean, if you're a small entrepreneur, you're also going to be a salesman. Mm-hmm. So you're obviously going to figure out what's important to the stakeholder you're speaking to. Mm-hmm. But what I've discovered with Climate Smart is there's usually some common ground, and you're not going to get everybody to agree on everything. Mm-hmm. That's the key thing. But pay attention. The other thing, and this is kind of a little bit off, and I won't take the time, but I do want to say this. Some of us in the room, I know I have, we've been through this before. Mm-hmm. I remember a thing called the Blacksburg Electronic Village. And we're talking about when the internet and software came around.
BevNet.
So watch this industry, because we're at the point that you all talk about. We're trying to figure it out. We're, same as we're trying to figure out how the internet's going to be wired. And at that one point in time, it was just the DOE and various people figuring out how they were going to use it. So we're at that early stage. I think we're going to move faster in this chapter. Partially because we have to. But also we're talking about maybe everybody worries about Europe being ahead of the United States in Climate Smart. I think the moment the United States, I'm a firm believer in what we do in this country, the moment that tip happens, the moment industry says, okay, we now can make money, we now can do this, you're going to watch the United States pull out faster than anybody else. We always do. Mm. I mean, the United States, at least in my lifetime, when pushed and shoved, we've always come on top. It's just because of the way we are. We let people think. There's less regulation. So government first comes in, provides the money, the regulation, but then eventually industry is going to figure it out. Entrepreneurs are going to figure it out, and we are off to the races. So those who are in college, those who are in universities, push and be ready. And then as far as the different stakeholders, that's what we who are in the early stages have to point out to these people. Mm. We've been here before. We will be there again. The race is we're all lining up at the track. Some of us are going to get across the finish line. Some of us aren't. There's some people that aren't even on the line yet. Mm-hmm. But I think as far as your original question is, that's what we need to always remind the regulators, the people in government, because they're focusing on what's going on now. You've got to continually remind them that there's a goal out there.
You really make me think of just the natural gas industry in the United States, right? It was minimal up until fracking, right? And as soon as we made supply cheap, right, and it could compete where it needed to compete, it just took off, right? I mean, we can look at the number of peaker plants that we've built, and the idea there being, if we can build out this infrastructure for hydrogen, right, if we can get supply cheap enough, demand in energy seems to always follow cheap supply, right? And so if we can get that down, and whether that's like waste gas recycling, like what you're doing with down in Petersburg, or other electrolysis that's connected to other maybe new or revitalized energy assets. But Brett, you talk with a lot of stakeholders, and a lot of what you do is drive the conversation and the learning and the understanding from these individuals. What are some tips, or what are some tricks, things that you've seen that would make everyone here a good ambassador and an evangelist for this transition?
Well, you talk to policymakers in terms of what is the economic impact to the state. And whether it's we can onshore companies who have interesting technologies, but they want to be part of an energy cluster. And so energy transition is about a growth strategy economically for the state. And, Go Virginia, we're very thankful to have Go Virginia's support because they recognize and they operate as almost like a seed fund to help us build these small projects that lead to greater investment in the state.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at Virginia's offshore wind industry, that has mobilized multiple providers to come in and do a whole supply chain. And that's created jobs, and that's creating, manufacturing, that's creating talent, and it's also creating a destination where other future talent will want to stay here in the state. So when we talk about this is a new industry, we're creating an industry, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's nuclear, whether it's somebody who wants to come in and make one little converter that helps, a diesel engine do a blend of hydrogen and now it's 70% more efficient. That company needs a place to make those devices.
Mm-hmm.
So they should be here in Virginia. So we talk about the impact of this transition as it means for creating a new economy. And that's what got me really excited about Hampton Roads, because the offshore wind industry has created a lot of interest from overseas to come and onshore development, manufacturing, and jobs. And so when you look at these clusters, the clusters of sort of momentum are what help attract other industries. And so part of it is industry adopting, but also part of it is having a talent base that's knowledgeable about all these new energy technologies. And that becomes an incentive for somebody to come here and do it in Virginia.
Yeah. I was just over yesterday as part of Game Changer Week. Hacksburg had an open house, and I think it's 1872 Pratt, right?
Mm-hmm.
I walked in and started reading the signs and seeing what was there, and it was just like this energy beehive, right? Like you had nuclear physics, right, and testing, fuel cycle testing there. You had lithium and battery companies.
Yep.
You had the hacker space. You had Render, right, which is more of a hardware, but it just like. It was like in this one building found this like cluster of, and I mean, in here there's an electric vehicle company right down the hallway here, and it's like this cluster is forming in this area.
Well, yeah, and we have companies that are tackling a really important part of supply chain, recycling batteries. And so, you have to have a battery economy if a battery recycling company is going to be established. So, I mean, rewind 5 or 10 years, that company wouldn't exist because the battery economy hadn't been developed yet.
Mm-hmm.
But now here they are providing a critical support structure for that ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so that's the impact of developing new technologies that are driving this transition.
Yeah. But I want to turn to you because you're a Virginia company, Independence is, but you guys have active or are looking nationally at projects. Could you give us a little flavor of where Virginia fits into that national ecosystem and what we're doing well, or maybe we could do a little better here in the state?
Yeah, we are looking at projects mostly up and down the East Coast, but long term we'll expand west, as America did.
It's your manifest.
Yeah. But I would say Virginia is competitive in a lot of areas. We're based in Virginia. Our founder and CEO lives in Northern Virginia, and our first plant, as you mentioned, is in Southern Virginia. Our next plant may be our electrolyzer will likely be sited here in Virginia, and so I can talk very tactically what's good and bad about that.
Yeah, we would love that.
Well, so the goodness is, organizations like CRC and DEIC that are helping us, providing a lot of help and assistance to an early stage company to find appropriate sites and stuff like that. I don't want to say the badness, but the constraint is, in a regulated utility state, right? The power prices can only be reduced so much with special tariffs and everything else. So it goes, it goes to that commercial viability. You have a certain capital expenditure on electrolyzer. The biggest driver of that commercial viability is actually the electricity going into the electrolyzer before we even get into the cleanliness of electricity and where you're pulling it off the grid. And so that's a tough, ultimately commercial businesses are, have to make a profit, right? And we're not looking to make overwhelming profit, but it's got to be commercially viable, or else we won't do it, right? It just is.
It's a science experiment.
Yeah.
So if I could tag on to that, because that's where the policymakers need to be educated about what can a state like Virginia do? Like,
Right.
what are the resources that create the opportunity? And they may go in a certain direction, as opposed to what other states are doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then I'm going to come back and say what I was saying earlier is we need to educate them, because what they have to realize, again, just like the internet, sometime in the future, the logjam's going to break loose, and all the economics and the profits are going to come from. So maybe we have to do some things that the legislators are like, I'm uncomfortable, don't make sense, but you look at them and say, but if you have them here and you keep them here, and when the logjam breaks, they're here. And so that is part of what we have to do to convince.
Yeah.
And then you can take it to a federal level. The United States needs to think the same thing.
Yeah, and I'll say at a kind of long-term play for independence, we are also part of the governor's advanced air mobility task force. That has a lot to do with the fact that our CEO and founder is a naval flight officer for 20 years. But
maybe.
but we're having these same conversations that Brett was alluding to at a very tangible level, right? Which is advanced air mobility, air taxis, drones, all these things will probably use hydrogen as a fuel cell because of battery technology and the weight and everything else. But it's, again, gets into that chicken and egg. So how do you kind of, from a policy and academia-wise, create the ecosystem by bringing those tech companies here that are going to build the advanced air mobility platforms, and then pairing that up with the fuel source of hydrogen. And then the policy, you get into state and federal policy, because now you're in the lane of the FAA and with all of these things. But I will say that Virginia is doing, especially on the advanced air mobility side, doing a really good job. It's behind some of the other states, I know, because we're using benchmarks of other states' programs. But we're having the conversation, right? We're starting to educate policymakers. We're starting to educate people outside of the marketplace, and so it's a good conversation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think for Virginia, a lot of that adoption will come when we can kind of show the convergence of these, right? Show how clean energy can now go into transportation, or how agriculture can now either produce energy or be more intimately linked there. The USDA has a lot of programs. Virginia Tech has just gotten a bunch of money in this climate smart safe Steve, or climate smart space Steve. And so maybe you want to dive into kind of what some of that looks like on your end, and then we'll open it up for some questions from the audience here. But maybe we'll just go around and see where that convergence really starts to happen, and leave us there.
Well, again, I mean, what you were just talking about, it was, I think, the College of Agriculture got the largest grant from the USDA, $80 million for climate smart technology. Now, Alan Grant, the Dean of Cows, may shoot me, but when you look at what they're going to be spending the money on with some other states, it's really just mostly perfecting what's already there. Which means you're going to get a very small improvement. So
stepwise, not
right.
leapfrog, so to speak.
So, but what I've been telling the university and preaching, and probably some in this room, is since Tech got the largest grant, from a marketing standpoint or a business standpoint, if they were in the private sector, they would claim that they are one of the major universities because they got the largest grant. I'm not sure that universities do that. They don't think that way. But getting back to your questions, what it basically means is again, agriculture uses so much energy nowadays. I mean, you look at smart farming, this and that, drone. It's who would have thought when I was over there on the ag quad that there were going to be things flying around? To me, it's just amazing, and I keep thinking about this. Looking at you all, I mean, a lot of kids in this room, they don't even know what it was like without the internet being around. So the same thing's going to happen. It's all converging, whether the drones are going to be run, like you said, by hydrogen because it's lighter. Agriculture is going to basically move into this area if it's not already, but transportation is going to move into this area, whether it's on trucks or ships, energy development. I mean, energy used to be coal and natural gas. That's how we got our electricity. Now we already know we're going to be moving away from that largely. I mean, we're excited about natural gas, but I think everyone in this room probably knows we don't want to be there in 30 years. So, that's largely what's going on. It's just like everything's merging into one, and the umbrella is we need to survive on this planet.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the cool things about this. That's why I think it's going to go faster. The internet was just improvements, communications. We'll question Facebook, but the point of the matter is we have to do this, because if we don't do it, we're going to end up looking like Mars. So we can no longer we have to do this because we want to survive.
Yeah.
Whereas before we just wanted to watch movies or do better communications. This is a survival. This is why I think it's going to go faster.
Ben, any convergences you see, like really interesting or unique convergences you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve hit a lot of them. I think the advanced air mobility is the one that it's kind of exciting, right? It's because it's not just kids flying drones to take pictures and stuff like that. It has agricultural implications, but also again, just back to this theme of like all the above. When Steve's talking about using the ammonia from chicken litter, in a cycle process, right? If you can do it all on the farm, great. If not, there's a use for that ammonia in shipping, right? So you asked about transportation earlier. Forklifts. I mentioned Class 8 trucks and kind of got excited and stuck there. But that
you were drooling.
That that wedge continues, right? It's into shipping with ammonia, and then it's into air mobility. There's the first aircraft took a test flight in UK on hydrogen power. So there's just a lot of exciting uses out there.
Brett, and bring us home, like convergences or exciting things you see on the horizon before we open it up to the audience here.
Well, the good news is we're having the conversation. If you look back to where scientists were begging and pleading industry to have the conversation 50, 60, 70 years ago, they saw this coming. The fact now is that we have industry saying we want to do this. So that's such a critical step for us as a species on this planet. Now the important work is how much are you willing to pay, to sacrifice? How much of that margin are you willing to have eroded in order to make that happen? And that's really the opportunity, because it has to be an abundance mindset, because it's really not, okay, I'm going to have to pay for this somewhere. It's, the pie gets bigger when you bring in new companies and new technologies. I mean, as a society, we have learned that disruption in technologies creates opportunity, not a scarcity mindset. So, the opportunity is for all of you to continue. And I think you asked the question, how can we all be ambassadors of this mission? It's really to help people understand how an abundance mindset will create bigger pies. And perhaps that margin doesn't erode, it gets a little bigger. And so, the good news is we're having the conversations that no one had or wanted to have 50 years ago. So we appreciate everything that you've done.
That's great. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for the Game Changer Week and the opportunity to be here, and thank you to Ben and Steve for joining us on this panel. So with an abundance mindset, love to turn it over to questions from the audience here, and just feel free to raise your hand if you have any, and then after this, do you want to say that the coffee truck will be open? So you are welcome to go grab free coffee.
Continue the conversation in the parking lot.
Yeah, continue the conversation out there. But any questions from the audience in the last few minutes here? Yeah, Lisa.
So given everything you've said about the progression, what could we do to enable pilot projects in this space that we're not doing today? Because I see that as a barrier to entry for a lot of companies.
maybe Ben or Steve, one of the entrepreneurs here or business owners?
A lot of education, a lot of talk. I mean, I've been involved with a lot of pilot projects, from technology to now green, to redoing buildings into rural areas. You have to really show that the pilot project makes the concept or the idea believable and feasible. And that's basically, so really when it comes right down to it, and learning the different programs. The one thing I will say, and I am now learning for new areas, there's usually things out there that can help fund pilots and people can help you move them forward. But as a quote-unquote entrepreneur, you're not aware of them, and until you basically get in there, network, talk to people, explain your concept, your idea. What I've discovered a lot of times, there's some real, I think we had this discussion earlier, there's some focuses or guidelines, but those guidelines can be a little bit, if it's a good idea and a pilot project and they understand what it's going to do for the Commonwealth or Maryland or so.
So I might tag in on that, Lisa. I mean, one of the things is to overcome the fears of failure. And a pilot really should be, just like an MVP, the opportunity to pivot if it doesn't work. And what we're seeing is there's an overwhelming desire to have everything pencil out to full scale before anyone takes the first step. And that's holding us back. And so suspending all of the penciling out and saying we've got to try this and get data. We have to let the data inform our decisions. And right now there's too much speculation and there's too many, concerns about where it might be 20 years from now financially versus what can we do. And to Ben's point, we have to be brave and courageous enough to be able to say electrolytic hydrogen doesn't make sense, because there's a lot of investment in education and infrastructure around electrolysis. We have to be brave enough to say it's not working out, and maybe it is, or maybe it will in certain areas. But I think to answer your question, we have to suspend a little bit of this obsession of penciling everything out to the last fifth digit 25 years from now before we can take one step forward.
Yeah, yes, and to both of those. And I would say, not to be parochial, but I think this is where early stage and startup companies are able to pivot and iterate more quickly than large corporations. And so I think there's a space there for that. The short answer to electrolytic production is cheap electricity, right? But that is a policy issue that require, in a regulated state, that's a policy issue that academia can help inform policymakers. Again, I think there's a space that is less threatening or less transactional that academia can approach policymakers far times better than commercial companies can.
I'm gonna even chime in there because it's kind of 1 point, cheap electricity, lots of conversations. The only way we're going to get to massive cheap electricity, in my opinion, Virginia's already planted the flag there, is nuclear energy, right? And future of these conversations, we were hoping to have April Wade here, but we're hoping her father's doing okay to talk about Virginia's nuclear future. We're already a leader in it. That'll get us there. Baseload cheap electricity. When you install electrolyzer, you don't only want to run it when the sun's running, you want to run it all the time. They're major investments. And a group of us had gone to a university to do some industry training, and one of the best stats from one of the presenters was in the nuclear industry, they equated it to, for every megawatt of a nuclear reactor you want to actually get permitted and sited and built, you need to have at least 100 cups of coffee, right, with community members, right, just based on what energy projects typically mean to a community. They're polarizing. Add nuclear in there, and they're even more polarizing, right? So you've got to meet with everyone from people, boots on the ground, your very, kind of community-driven organizations and citizens to your highest level state and federal senators and representatives, and having those conversations. And so for every megawatt, 100 cups of coffee. Keep that in mind for some of these big energy plays. But other questions from the audience? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
So, you talked about kind of educating policymakers, educating, officials on these things and getting them interested, excited about it. Once some of these technologies, innovations start to take off, then there's a whole other workforce or, ecosystem that gets developed. What are those skills that we need to be, helping kids today get excited about, develop, to be able to be part of production and distribution and service and all the other things that are going to be required to sustain these new
Anyone?
Yeah, I will say I think it's yes, there is not a hydrogen workforce today, and we are, we as a small company are working to build that, but it takes a village. Back to Braden's opening comment, right? I would say that the your question, sorry.
Is it like the skill development.
Yeah.
For this stuff's going to be
Okay.
commercially viable.
Sorry, I lost my thought
That's
there.
okay.
I think to Steve's earlier point about realizing climate change is an existential threat, I feel like the generation in college today knows that, right? More so than my generation or our generation, like that is a fact. So there's not a convincing that has to be done there, and so I hope that academia is capitalizing on that energy to say, okay, we start with the base fact of this is an existential threat. Like, now what are we going to do about it? So tapping into that energy to get people excited about clean energy. I'll say we kind of view it in two spheres of creating the hydrogen workforce. There's the corporate workforce that needs to be developed, and that's your engineers, project managers, everything else that are going through university. But even more so, it's the technical skill workforce. And so we have a partnership relationship with NFAO, which is the National Organization for Historically Black Colleges and Universities, and they have a partnership with Amosite, who does online training, and we are working with them for developing hydrogen tech training for those people who are running the plant, operating the daily basis of turning the knobs and making sure the pressures are right and everything else. We are, in some of the areas that we are building, we're also tapping into that natural gas workforce that we talked about before, because as you start making that conversion, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, they're converting, those communities have converted from coal to natural gas. We think hydrogen's part of the next thing that they can convert to, so tapping into those existing communities where that technical expertise kind of already exists.
In the consciousness of time, maybe one last question, and then we'll continue the conversation afterwards, so please.
I grew up in Blacksburg, but I've recently been living in Vermont for a couple years, and the biggest company up there, Green Mountain Power, they're completely net zero, and they're an investor-owned company, but they have a bunch of hydro up there and nuclear as well. So I'm wondering what you guys think would be the most viable options in Virginia. I work for a solar company currently, and I'm a little disappointed that Tech has some plans for more solar, but to not see more solar here, because Tech is such a leader in the area, and just, with our offshore wind, like you mentioned, methane capture, biofuels, what do you guys think is kind of our way to get our power companies to net zero?
I'll take this first. I am not the utility company, so I do not speak for Dominion. I have to put that disclosure here. We are a nonprofit, but I honestly think it's going to be all of the above, right? I mean, it's a talking point that's come out, but I also think if we want fully clean, right, and if we're considering clean, not utilizing carbon capture, and we need to remove all of our coal plants and remove all of our natural gas peaker plants, then you're really left with one option in the state, right? Well, maybe two and three options, but nuclear is going to be your biggest baseload replacement for coal and natural gas. You can't do it any other way, right? We have the country's largest offshore wind development going on, right? We don't have a lot of onshore wind. We're just not a good windy spot for it. And we have pockets of solar, right? Petersburg, South Side, Virginia, is relatively there are large solar plays out there, 800 acres, 1,000 acres of solar. But you also have problems with there too, right? With land utilization and kind of competition for developable land. And so it really is going to take all of it, and it's also going to take the recognition that every one of those energy systems has pros and has cons, right? You have a short lifespan on your solar panels, you have a long reactor lifespan, but you also have the kind of siting issues and you have the cost issues, right? And so being able to pull all of those together and say, we can do solar, we can do wind, we have, I mean, 60%, I think Luke, I think your employee said 60% of this region is powered off of hydro from Claytor Lake and from Smith Mountain Lake, right? I mean, those are together almost a gigawatt of hydro that we have in this region. And so you just start looking at where it's going to have to be this distributed network, right? We're going from a very centralized grid to what is that semi-decentralized grid, right? Not fully decentralized. I don't think we'll ever get energy to that point where everyone has a little nuclear reactor in their house, but I think you start spreading this out and recognizing that you want to that you have benefits, you have pros and cons of all of them that need to layer together. And just like we do full stack software development, we're going to be doing full stack energy development, right? And really looking at it holistically. So Vermont has a lot of great programs. We have a number of our companies who have gone through Delta Climb Vermont and work with the utility up there. And so the Northeast has kind of the inverse energy consumption of the South, right? Where winters are your heavy energy loads and the summers are our heavy energy loads, and figuring out how those connect and work together, it's going to take every energy system. So yeah, really fun conversation. Well, thank you all for coming out. Free coffee from Space Rabbit Coffee. What an awesome name, and really appreciate the panel here. We have a couple of bags for you guys with little swag items, but thank you all so much. Let's give them a round of applause.